told me that in a lot of schools around there, they actually teach like Ullen Scots or Lowland Scots as a language, as a second language in the schools, which I found totally bizarre. I mean, such a thing 20 years ago in Scotland would have been unimaginable. I know they do it now, but like when I was at school, if we spoke in Scots, you'd get punished for it. Like sort of like, kind of humiliated in front of the class. And they're actually teaching it as a language in that area, which it's quite bizarre to me. Sorry, it was just an oddity I wanted to get in there.
No, I think it is, and just to maybe close off this wee conversation on this point, that this Northern Irish chap was saying to me, well, don't you feel responsible? I mean, the Northern Irish are, you might argue, the only sort of real Britons in Britain. You know, the English have their problematic identities and maybe primarily identify as British. But for Northern Irish unionists in particular, you know, the union is sort of fundamental to their sense of political self. And actually, what struck me was, as a Scottish nationalist, I felt really quite irresponsible. I feel sort of as if that I haven't really given a great degree of thought about what a yes vote in 2014 might do in Northern Ireland, and I kind of felt moderately guilty about that on some level. I don't think we should take responsibility for Northern Ireland like you were saying there, Natalie. Or I wouldn't necessarily want an additional Scotland and Northern Ireland to form a separate state. But I just thought it struck me that I and other nationalists and other Scots, because we don't have that flow of feeling back across the sea. That we are being quite irresponsible in some measure about the impact which our constitutional self-referential project might have there.
Well, partly due to years of misinformation and disinformation campaigns by the British government. Nobody in Britain really has any idea what's going on in Northern Ireland. We've been lied to consistently about it. In fact, just to get in a funny story, another friend of mine from Northern Ireland, we were in a pub one time, and to show you the level of ignorance, a guy comes up and says, oh yeah, from Northern Ireland, yeah, I've got a mate from the Proverbs. And my mate from the Proverbs. Immediately my friend responded, yeah, I'm from Look Before You Leap, but my mum's from Too Many Cooks Spoil It.
Ah dear. No, but it is interesting. It's good. It's interesting. It's perhaps sociologically, politically, it's more significant that we don't take these things seriously, because I think they are alternative ways of imagining, you know, who's engaged by constitutional reform and fundamental political change. Anyway, to move on to our next kind of topic, I think it was you again, Michael. You had another perspective on well, I suppose the latest in this kind of EU economics NATO argument, which the Labour Party have been pursuing again in Holyrood and in Glasgow City Council, I think you were saying this week.
Well, yeah, that was kind of a two-part question. So the first one there would be the strategies becoming clear for the unionists. For a while you thought they were going to argue with the economic thing because it was EU. Then it was NATO thing, and that's changed, so it's not the economic thing. It seems that they think they've lost their economic argument, or at least they can't win by campaigning on that, or that they can't win by campaigning on their cultural Britishness argument, which is, even after the Olympics, it died a death in about 5 minutes. So I think their strategy seems now to be push uncertainty. Everything's uncertain. Everything's going to fall apart. We don't know where we're going to be. And that seems to be the longer term strategy, even if the particular issue that they're talking about seems to change. Push uncertainty. I don't know if you've noticed that kind of thing.
Yeah, what do you think, Natalie?
Well, interestingly, I was in Glasgow Council full council on Thursday when that particular debate was ongoing, and actually I have a copy of the motion here. It is actually about economics, strangely enough, to somewhat contradict you slightly, Michael. Basically, Gordon Matheson was calling on Glasgow City Council Chief Exec to conduct an assessment of the financial impact on the council. Nobody in the chamber actually denied that was a good use of the chief executive's time, and certainly it would save us a hell of a lot of work if he does the work for us. I think the SNP in that we're hoping that it is done with an open mind and not a predetermined outcome. Already written, but it was a very bad-tempered debate. The quality of it was not particularly high. Alistair Watson, it was like a memo has gone out from central office to the Labour Party on what words to be using, what rhetoric to bash the nationalists with this week. I noted that he was using the word chancer repeatedly, as was Joanne only an hour earlier at FMQs.
So did it come across as a real economic examination, a real
No.
contingency planning, or just a scaremongering or politicking?
No, the actual motion is absolutely fine. I don't have a problem with the motion whatsoever. But the debate that accompanied it, the motion was completely lost in. I mean, it was quite a nasty, narrow-minded finger-pointing exercise where Alistair Watson in particular was pointing fingers at the SNP and suggesting that they didn't have Glasgow at the forefront of their concerns, and it really impugning their motivations for becoming local councillors, predicating it on only being interested in independence, and it was quite offensive to the SNP councillors there. I just felt it was just another opportunity to flex their overall majority in the council and a bit of get it right up you politics.
From Scottish Labour? Never.
Glasgow Labour. It's a totally different beast.
Ah, okay.
I mean, what struck me, one of the things this week was in Westminster. We saw David Cameron's defeat at the hands of his Tory backwoodsman and the Labour Party. Just, I think, just the day before First Minister's questions, I think it was this week, about the extension.
Sorry, First Minister's quotation.
Quotations, First Minister's quotations. And I think what struck me as interesting about that is that's primarily, as I understand it, a debate about expanding the EU budget, which seems to me a reasonable thing to say at this time of financial restraint. I don't see why the EU should be getting more cash. But I think we really do see from the kind of parties down in London, a kind of common sense emerging that we are going to have a referendum likely in the next 5 years, say, about a kind of in-out referendum about the EU and whether Britain remains part of it. And actually, this kind of, I think, invites us to think about uncertainty. I think, well, where is the balance of uncertainty in terms of the nationalist proposal in terms of the EU and in terms of all of the uncertainties about what the Westminster politicians will do on the EU, but on a whole range of other questions. I mean, I think I said last week that there's this argument that the balance of uncertainty is all one way, and that it's only for nationalists to contend with it. And I think you're right to say that they're really trying to get a lot of juice out of that in terms of the kind of Labour Party and the Conservative Party's arguments in Holyrood and in public. But I don't know if you noticed, but when they had that EU debate in Holyrood this week, Patrick Harvey intervened on Joanne Lamont and said to her, effectively, if the SNP, if nationalists, I suppose, in the broad sense, are willing to say that there is uncertainty and we recognise uncertainty, would she stop asking for categorical answers? And I think as ever in his kind of neat forensic way, Patrick puts his finger precisely on the point, actually, and the kind of the core hypocrisy of the kind of Labour Tory position that we're getting on this, that they're asking for something which is unavailable, and I think that's really pretty dubious and is scaremongering.
I think they're perfectly well aware of that as well.
I think they would have to be. I mean, well, one of the examples I don't know about this kind of Sterling zone proposal that the SNP are in favour of now in terms of after independence, and I think it was Ruth Davidson who was saying, oh well, how can we have assurances? How can we get assurances? And do you sort of seriously think that a unionist Tory Treasury is going to agree to pre-referendum discussions about whether it will agree on Scotland adopting sterling currency after independence? Of course they're not going to do so. I mean, it's like, should we be surprised? These people don't shoot themselves in the foot. They can be incompetent, but they're not that daft,
I think that kind of goes along with the kind of EU argument as well. Obviously, the Conservative government have stated they're not going to seek advice because that would be preempting a yes vote. And so they're just unwilling to do it because I think it would be it could be beneficial to the yes campaign should they do that. And they're not going to want to do anything which particularly takes away the uncertainty because you're right, this is an angle that they're going to really play up over the next 2 years, and it's quite clear to see that is coming through, and that they're ramping up the kind of personal rhetoric. It looks to me as if they're somewhat trying to use all of this to undermine the First Minister as well. There's very much I think they've very much decided that he is the kind of key figure in the Yes campaign, and they want to take him off at the knees. And I have heard that is a strategy from someone within the Better Together. No.
I don't really want... Oh, sorry. I don't really want to give the game away here, but I'm quite happy if that's their strategy, because the people I speak to who want independence don't say, I want independence because I like Alex Salmond. So if they continue with that strategy, it might backfire on them. I hope it does, obviously, but I don't see that. Maybe it's because he's quite an able politician, which is certainly true. But I think the reasons for actually wanting independence don't include Alex Salmond, and if they're fixated on him, it's not necessarily the worst thing. Although some of the attacks tend to be absurd and ridiculous and all of that.
I think.
Well, it'd be good if they concentrate on Alex Salmond, that takes their focus off what other things are going on, and that suits me perfectly.
But to maybe try and find a rationalisation to defend the Labour Party's strategy, surely it is that these kind of uncertainties that we were discussing before are endemic, are likely to be part of the debate up until 2014 and go on after that they are possibilities and uncertainties for the future independent Scottish state. And as a result, in order to convince a still slightly, obviously, sceptical Scottish public, the SNP, the pro-nationalist forces, are going to have to project an image of significant credibility and trust to say, well, yeah, sure, there are all of these uncertain things, but we can get this done. I have faith in our hidden powers, and as a result, you might argue that one of the best ways to undermine that credibility would be to undermine the most credible figure in the pro-nationalist position. That would be how I would perhaps interpret what they've been up to. I don't know whether it's this kind of personalization of constitutional politics is a good thing. In fact, I think it isn't. But I think you can see the sort of argument and the kind of overall thrust, I think, of what Lamont's trying to do.
But yeah, you can see it. I'm just not sure if it will be a success for them.
No, I suspect not. Okay, should we move on maybe to our last wee point of discussion? Which was one of mine, really. I haven't blogged about it recently, but about the issue of cameras in courts, and particularly in criminal courts. There's been a few interesting discussions going on about this recently. The Justice Committee in Holyrood held an evidence session, which was very, very robust, including Donald Finlay and various other kind of legal figures, and press figures as well. And it's been discussed in the kind of full chamber of the Parliament. The Lord President of the Court of Session, the new Lord President, Lord Gill, who's also Scotland's first Catholic, to tie into our first discussion to hold that office, is going to review his predecessor's kind of determination about when cameras can go into courts. And basically, they can only go in if you get the consent of the judge who's presiding over it. And I just think it's kind of interesting what these arguments are about why you might be concerned about cameras in criminal courts, or why it might be a really good thing. And just to start off with one of the arguments you sometimes hear is the fact that big trials that are covered in the press are already being cherry-picked, are being filtered by the press, and you get bits and pieces, you get wee vignettes, you get the kind of common sense from the journalists about what the interest of the story is. So as a result, you're not going to compromise that if you just have clips on telly of, say, witnesses giving particular evidence. I don't know what either of you two think of that. Maybe Michael, what do you think about the idea of cameras in criminal court?
Well, again, just as an oddity, you're a bit of a young whippersnapper, so you won't remember this, but I think about 15 years ago, there was a programme called Frontline Scotland, kind of Scottish version of Panorama or something, and they actually televised one trial. It was the only one that's ever been televised, and it was this guy who, let's just say, I don't want to be nasty, but probably wasn't firing on all mental cylinders. And what he used to do was steal buses, drive them away, clean them, and put them back. And
very, very public spirited.
Yeah, and
not the big society at work.
But the strange thing about that program was that they had it so he did the trial and everything, and there had been some kind of deal before the trial that they weren't allowed to mention that he had had 8 previous convictions for doing the same thing. So you kind of watch the trial, and you're just thinking, this seems so weird. Like, what kind of story is this? Like, what? And then they said after that, here's what we weren't allowed to tell you, which was that, and then it was kind of in context, and that kind of relates to what you're saying. Like, if you put a trial on television, sorry, that's the dogs barking outside.